The story itself looks at a particular family who has come from Congo to the UK to seek asylum as refugees. And so it's a parents, Mami and Papa, the two parents and the children, Jean and Marie. And it looks at their lives in London, how they try to integrate into the society, but also how they try to hold on to their roots and to their culture. And it presents the story from two perspectives. So from the perspective of the parent, mainly the father, who is trying to protect their children from their political reality, and also their children, Jean and Marie, mainly from the perspective of Jean, who is at the stage where he's asking more questions about the world around him, about his experiences and so forth. But it also looks at how a community comes to form itself in places where it's not represented, and as well the parents' experience prior to them leaving. What is it that caused them to leave? What is it that, what were their dreams and their aspirations and their hopes, before they left? Because we often don't hear that part of the story. We often don't hear that narrative when we think about immigrants or refugees. And also for me, as someone who came within that, it's only a story that I really came to discover much, much later. And I think there's so many issues to do with that. And this is just kind of one way of contributing to that story. So Kinshasa, 1970s. All right, we're going on a little journey. Kinshasa was a thriving city. The two-lane streets were filled with imported cars, only driven by the Belgians and the affluent Congolese men with their wives or mistresses as passengers. They showed their wealth dressed in smart suits with short-sleeved arms, neck scarves with matching pocket squares, and weighted gold or silver watches hung at the end of their wrists like a burden of sacrifice. The women, who were mostly held to managing household duties or worked, a very few and far in between, in positions of hospitality or servitude, wore beautifully bright-coloured printed clothes, a liputa they tied around their waist, and a kitambala usually made of silk, which they would fold at the corners and tie around to cover their heads. Kinshasa was not a city you came from. It was a city you came to, for work, for business, for travel. But once you came, it kept you, so you would never leave. Maybe it was whatever was in the air, the Malay of languages, the formality of French, the official tongue spoken in public spaces, the institutions, the schools, universities and offices, airport lounges and government buildings, or the Lingala, which ran like a sweeping undercurrent through the roads with its backbent rhythm, stood on the street corners or back alleyways on the tongues of lovers after the sunset when the music would play. The music, in the language of the swaying hips of women and the watchful eyes of men whose eyes were their hands, and they would watch until they wanted to feel, all the while the alcohol flowed until it too spilled onto the streets. Mami came from a very strict family, in a society where women were afforded very little privileges. Unlike the men, she was held to impossibly high standards, which meant there was very little she could do, never mind what she could do wrong. They lived in a large house with black metallic gates in Gombe. Her father, Kokoya Mobali, was a military man, whose position Mami was never quite sure of. He was important enough to have intricately designed multi-point badges of honor hung on the lapels of the khaki green uniform he wore, and have someone who could tell what to do and run around after him, but not too important that he could not himself be told what to do, such as disappear in the middle of the night for a mission or leave his family whilst they had dinner on a Sunday afternoon together after church. He spoke in detail of honouring the family and fighting for things Mami was too young to understand. Her mother, Kokoya Mwasi, took care of house and home, raising the children, which was seen as the duty bestowed upon her by divine right of her gender. She was a quiet woman, never spoke louder than her husband, never walked ahead of her husband, never loved another man but her husband. Each day she wore the most beautiful liputa. Whether she was shopping at the Zandu or in Sunday Mass, she looked elegant and graceful, as was expected of her. She had so much more than other women, she did not dare challenge it, for if she did, it meant risking losing all she had received. Mami had 4 sisters, 2 older and younger, Marthe, Monique, Micheline and Marie. She carried them through their ups and downs as if she was their balancing scale. She was the reluctant mediator, the peacekeeper between the two warring clans of the elder and the younger. She was the voice of reason. At times, she looked the oldest, not due to her appearance, but her sense of style and dress. She emulated her mother, fitting comfortably into her mother's clothes, wishing for the life she had, a life of quiet abundance. Kokoya Mobali felt disappointed when he found out their first child would be a girl. He believed a man's firstborn, as did many others, must be a boy to continue his legacy. 5 daughters later, and the disappointment turned to damnation, then eventually acceptance, as the sight of his legacy faded away. He felt he must be carrying some kind of internal curse from a ganga. After Mummy was born, he treated the youngest two who came, Micheline and Marie, as if they were boys. They too would follow in his footsteps. Nonetheless, he never let his daughters know exactly how he felt. He loved them dearly, the best way he knew how a father could, overprotective, with authority and from a distance. As quiet and submissive as Kokoya Mosi was, her smile widened with each daughter she gave birth to, knowing she could never challenge or overcome the power of this man who she loved as her husband. Giving him 5 daughters was her quiet act of rebellion. Thank you.